Assalamualaikum and selamat sejahtera. My name is Nur Nazifa binti Rosari. My matric number 256852. In today's video, I am going to share with you about my research on analyzing the unsold housing stocks problem in Penang by using a systems dynamics approach. Okay, next we move to problem statement. Penang construction sector experienced a contraction of 3.8% as of in 2018, reflect largely in supply slowdown and weak demand. A large number of completed unsold residential properties are found in the higher end category, as depicted in the figure. About 3,353 overhang units and 10,038 unsold units from overall total of 13,391 units as of in year 2019. A total of 3,929 overhang units worth about 3.26 billion ringgit Malaysia were recorded, with 58% of them valued at 500,000 ringgit Malaysia and below remain unsold, according to the Penang Institute. Timur Laut had the greatest number of unsold units, which is 39.6%, followed by Barat Daya, which is 36%, and Seberang Perai Tengah, which is 16%. It had been only used as an index when forecasting the housing market in previous research. So, this study will identify the causes of unsold housing stock and analyze the dynamics between various variables of housing market through systems dynamics approach. Okay,
Next, we proceed to the research questions. The research question explores the aspects of unsold housing stocks in Penang. Thus, these are the following questions that need to answer. First, what are the possible causes of the unsold housing stocks in Penang? Second, do the unsold housing stocks give big impact to the housing market in Penang? Third, how can the effect of the unsold housing stocks be analysed over the time? The objectives of this study are as follows. First, to identify the significant factors of the unsold housing stocks in Penang. Second, to develop a system dynamics model of housing market in Penang in order to analyze the relationship between identified factors. Third, to conduct interventions using developed model in order to assess the impact of design actions by the government towards reducing the number of the unsold housing stocks in Penang.
Okay, next we move to model development. There are 5 stages of a systems dynamics modeling process, which including first, problem articulations, second, formulation of dynamic hypothesis, then formulations of a model, model testing, and policy formulation and evaluation. The modeling stage that will be conducted in this study is an iterative process where the developed model will go through the constant process of modeling, testing, and refinement as depicted in the figure. The modeling process repeated until both structure and behavior of the simulated model match the real structure and behavior. The stages in system dynamics modeling process are grouped into 2 approaches, namely qualitative and quantitative. The qualitative approach, which are problem articulation and formulation of dynamic hypothesis, focus on the conceptualize of the model, Meanwhile, the quantitative approach describing the remaining stages emphasizes on quantifying the aspect of the model. Next, we proceed with problem articulation. The development of systems dynamic model will be start with problem articulation. The figure here shows the key variables of dynamic relationships in the housing market in Penang. The structure of this model will be divided into two subcomponents of the factor affecting the unsold housing stock, which is housing supply and housing demand.
The variables included in the model were divided into different types, which is endogenous, exogenous, and excluded, as shown in the table. An endogenous variable exists within the boundary of a system, while exogenous variable exists outside of the system. An excluded variable defined as a variable that is not included in the model. This type of variables was classified to ensure that the details of the variables needed to be modeled are included. This figure showing the causal loop diagram of housing market in Penang. The diagram involved developing a work theory of how unsold housing stock arose by showing the linkage of the mean variables. Next, the figure showing the stock and flow diagram of housing market in Penang. Reference mode help to clarify a problem statement. The range of time overpopulation, house demand, house supply, house price and unsold housing stocks were identified as a reference mode. Reference mode help in identifying which variables are the most important to include in a model and also helpful in abstracting away elements of behavior that are not central to a problem. Vensim software also includes an automatic unit checking button to uncover any dimensional error. The figure below shows the result from the checking process that shows the model has passed unit checking test. Next, we proceed to behavior validity and base model.
Okay, firstly, the figure here shows the behavior validity and base model of Penang citizens. Penang citizen is one of the categorized as stock in this model. Referring to these two figures, the analysis is done through comparing the trend from the real data, Penang citizens, and simulated data, which is classified as current. The two output generated from the behavior task that shows the baseline model fits with the real data pattern. The baseline and table time show the increasing pattern of population in Penang, which described as people over the time, which described in year. Okay, next we proceed with the behavior validity in housing demand. Housing demand is also a stock, categorized as a stock in this model. Referring to these two figures, the analysis is done through comparing the trend from the real data, which is housing demand, and the simulated data identified as current. The two outputs here are generated from the behavior test that shows the baseline model fits the real data pattern, and the baseline and table time show the increasing pattern of housing demand in Penang that classified in units over the time that classified in year. Okay, then we proceed with housing supply. Housing supply also categorized as a stock in this model. Referring to these two figures, the analysis is done through comparing the trend from the real data, which is housing supply, and simulated data, which is identified as current. The two outputs here generated from the behavior test that shows the baseline model fits the real data pattern. The baseline and the table time show the increasing pattern of housing supply in Penang, which are identified in units, and over the time, which identified in year. This figure here showing the behavior validity of existing housing price. Existing housing price also categorized as stock in this model. Referring to these two figures, the analysis is done through comparing the trend from the real data, which classified as existing housing price, and simulated data, which identified as current. The two outputs here generated from the behavior test that shows the baseline model fits with the real data pattern. The baseline and table time show the decreasing pattern of existing housing price in Penang, which classified as RM or Ringgit Malaysia over the time, which classified in year. Lastly, unsold housing stocks also categorized as stock in this model. This figure showing the unsold housing stocks that tested from the behavior validity. Referring to these two figures, the analysis is done through comparing the trend from the real data, which is stated as unsold housing stocks, and simulated data, which is stated in current. The two outputs here generated from the behavior test that shows the baseline model fits with the real data pattern. The baseline and table time show the decreasing patterns of unsold housing stocks in Penang that are identified in units over the time that identified in year. Okay, we move on to the intervention 1. The first scenario represents the strategy where government introduced an initiative to increase the housing demand in Penang. In this intervention, the government must propose a suitable campaign to attract buyers to buy a house, especially for the youth. In the future, if the government manage to conduct a campaign, the variable of percentage of discounts needs to be added. Finding from the analysis shows that increasing units from model, current to scenario analysis. People interested with the campaign that's classified as percentage of discount increases the units of housing demand. Then, the second strategy in intervention 2 is adding the review of house price. As shown in the figure, the results from the additions of variable review the pricing of basic units. The analysis shows that a decreased number of housing price if government conducted a review on basic units of house. This can lead to increase in housing demand and continuously decreasing the unsold housing stocks.
Okay, next, we proceed with results and discussion. This model of housing market simulations was conducted by inputting the annual total numbers of unsold housing stocks, housing demand, housing supply, and housing price from 2015 to 2019. VenSim, a software program developed to support the visualizations and simulations of stock flow diagram, was used to conduct the simulation. The graph mentioned before show the x-axis represent time in year and the y-axis represent the units, people and ringgit Malaysia that converts actual value for the total numbers of unsold housing stocks, total numbers of housing demand, total number of housing supply, housing price and population of Penang citizens. This figure presents the simulation results of unsold housing stocks. The blue line in the graph indicates the actual values of the data and the red line indicates the simulation results from the model and equations presented in this study. Due to the anticipated challenges facing property market in 2015 include rising construction costs which leading to higher house prices, land prices, uncertainty posed by the impending goods and services tax GST, and the inadequate supply of labour, Penang housing market was witnessed a gradual increase in unsold housing stocks until year 2016. Some action was undergone to decrease the unsold housing stock back in 2017. Then, the number of unsold housing stock increased because of excessive supply of houses in 2018. As a result, in fourth quartile of 2019, the actual values of unsold housing stocks in Penang become decreasing, which are similar to the simulated value. As a conclusion, this paper has illustrated the development of the causal loop diagram and the stock flow diagrams of the unsold housing stocks problem in Penang to assist in better understand of the housing market in Penang. This study focuses on both qualitative and quantitative approach of the system dynamics that involves the development of causal loop diagram and stock flow diagram in analyzing the causal and feedback relationships between factors. The two factors that have been studied in this study that affect the unsold housing stocks are housing demand and housing supply. The future extension of this study needs to emphasize on the new simulation model development to overcome the limitation of the simulation results that could not correspond with actual trends if the global financial crisis occurred. Besides, this study also suggested for future research to emphasize on the simulation model development by using a factor of existing housing price index for analyzing unsold housing stocks problem.
That's all for me. Thank you for watching.